Good evening. My name is Kelly Ma, and I'm the Assistant Director of Global Arts and Collaborations at Asia Society Museum in New York. I'm delighted to share a conversation on food, how food, like art, connect us as humans with two very inspiring individuals, John Wang, founder of Queen's Night Market, and a co-author of the new book, The World Eats Here, which you can purchase online through Asia Store. And Timothy Hsu, founder of the Mandarins Tea Room and director of Chinatown Soup. John co-wrote The World Eats Here with his wife, Storm Garner, who unfortunately couldn't join us this evening and sent her best. So John will be on double duty during this conversation. Right now in the US and around the world, with the ongoing Black Lives Matter movement and protests against racial injustice while in the midst of a global pandemic outbreak, it is more important than ever to encourage open dialogues and take action. Whether among friends and family or in public institutions, we all need to recognize and commit to reforming the inequality, racism, and discrimination deeply embedded in our systems. It is vital to listen to and learn from each other's perspectives, to amplify the voices of those who are working to dismantle oppression and forge cooperation, and to collectively move forward with constructive changes. This will help guide us to building a more sensitive, caring, respectful, and compassionate society. It will require lots of rethinking and continuous reform for museums to confront their colonial or imperial pasts and work to undo existing structures of inequality. Before we start today's conversation about how art and food connect us, I'd like to acknowledge that museums are also places where we can learn about ourselves and others and foster cross-cultural understanding in hopes of creating a more just society. Thank you for joining us and being a part of the learning and sharing here today. Although our galleries at Asia Society Museum are now by necessity closed to the public, our museum team are working to bring you the best possible web content so we can continue to share great art with you. Please make asiasociety.org/museum your home away from home, since our online museum material is accessible 24/7. I want to thank our members for their continuous support. If you're not already a member, please consider joining us. A few highlights from our online programming. If you've missed our timely spring exhibition, The Art of Impermanence, Japanese works from the John C. Weber collection and Mr. and Mrs. John D. Rockefeller III collection, you can read about the exhibition and its works on our website, as well as go on a virtual tour led by Adriana Prozer, the curator of the exhibition. All four of the exhibition lectures given by Adriana, Sinead Vilbar, Simon Kainer, and Melissa McCormick are also available online. Looking ahead, the importance and vitality of this concept of impermanence has not lost its relevance, and in fact, seems to have become even more pronounced in our current time of uncertainty. Asia Society Museum is moving forward with its inaugural Asia Society Triennial entitled We Do Not Dream Alone this fall. Please visit asiasociety.org/triennial for updates. Our colleagues in the world of policy and business have an ongoing array of online programs addressing foreign relations, business, and politics. If you like our programs on food, in July, there will be a conversation with Chef Jenny Dorsey, moderated by my colleague Yoshie Ito, Assistant Director of Global Initiatives. So please subscribe to our newsletter to learn more about the program. For information about all of our work here in New York and around the globe, please visit asiasociety.org. Now, a little bit about the format of this conversation. It will run about 15 minutes. followed by an opportunity for Q&A with panelists through Facebook and YouTube. Please list your questions in the comment or live chat sections. After this broadcast, the conversation will be posted within a few days on the Asia Society website. So, I'd like to begin our conversation by having each of our guests talk a little bit about what they do and how food transcends borders and unites people. John, would you like to start?
Sure. Happy to be here. Thanks. Storm does send her best and her regrets for not being able to make it. And nice to be with you, Timothy. Kelly asked if I would just share some pictures from the Queens Night Market to get people who haven't been a sense of what it looks like. So I'm just going to share my screen really quick. So if you haven't been to the Queens Night Market, it launched back in 2015. Its mission is to be New York City's most affordable and diverse and accessible community event. It strives to celebrate the ethnic and cultural diversity of New York City and Queens specifically. It's over the last 5 years, it's drawn almost 1.5 million visitors. On busy nights, we have sometimes up to 20,000 visitors, sometimes more. Back in 2015, one of the things we introduced was a $5 price cap on anything you can buy food related. In the last few years, we've introduced a few $6 exceptions, but as a rule, there's nothing at the Queens Night Market that costs food-wise that'll cost you more than $6. And that the purpose of that was to make it as affordable as possible in New York City, with a theory that there's no greater equalizer than affordability. If you haven't been, here are some pictures. This is the line to get in right before we open. You'll see lots of performances that span the globe. We try to curate diversity in our performances, and you'll see lion dance there. You'll see breakdancing. You'll see anything from African dance troupes to Brazilian percussion groups to jazz to brass bands. You name it, and there's a good chance we've had it. There's also, it strives to be very family friendly, so you'll see a few games scattered around, a lot of them motivated by some of the night markets in Asia, which I think Kelly will mention later on. Again, the hours, probably 5 to midnight Saturday nights out in Flushing Meadows in Queens. The hours of 5 to 9 are pretty much taken over by kids and young families. As you can see, there's a dance floor we set up every Saturday, and kids love to boogie down on this thing until the late night, and then the adults like to boogie down in different ways. So, but it's, you know, hopefully you can see that the kids seem to be having a great time, as here too. Sometimes these light up balloons are for sale. On any given night, you'll find up to 60 food vendors from all over the world. One of the things we're most proud of is the fact that we've represented over 90 countries through our food vendors. Our goal that we tell people is that one day we'd like to have a vendor from every country represented here in New York City. So we're about 2/3 of the way there, still plugging along as much as we could. Maybe Timothy will appreciate this. This is from our Hong Kong food stand. People always say you should throw in some food pics. And also this is about art and food, so what better, how appropriate. Here's some people enjoying from the same vendor on the left side, a Hong Kong vendor selling soy sauce noodles. And then on the bottom right, we have a Bengali dish. Left here, you have Korean. I sort of tried to focus a little bit on Asian, some of the Asian dishes we feature, both at the night market, but also in the book, The World Eats Here, which you'll see in a brief second. On the right side was a Vietnamese dish. This is a Filipino chicken adobo, the national dish of Philippines. And there's some mood atmosphere shots so you can get a sense of the Queens Night Market in case you haven't been. Another thing that we really are proud of is that we've launched over 300 businesses in New York City, meaning over 300 businesses have made their operational debut at the Queens Night Market, which, without sort of context, it's a huge number, but sort of, every year that means we're sort of launching on average about 60 new businesses. Not all of them stay in business. Not all of them are still in businesses. Some have moved on to start brick and mortars, and some have, pivoted their businesses in other ways, but it's something that we're really proud of. It's a real economic engine. Some more sort of gratuitous night market shots. This is actually photo credit to Storm, who's not here. It also forms the basis of the cover of the book. Sort of gives you a sense of how many people show up, and some of the lines, which I know Kelly doesn't love lines from past conversations, but if you don't mind waiting 5 or 10 minutes for your food, it's a great place to show up. And let's see a few more atmosphere shots. And, I would have loved for Storm to talk a little about this. We co-wrote this book, The World Eats Here. It's 88 recipes submitted by the over 50 vendors at the Queen's Night Market, representing over 40 countries. So each recipe is paired with a narrative, a biographical narrative, varying lengths and varying formats. And those are all adapted from Storm's Oral History Project, which is the Queen's Night Market Vendor Stories Oral History Project, which she's been doing the last 2 years and is an ongoing project. She interviewed over 50 vendors for this. Some of the longer interviews go 4, maybe 5 hours. So condensing that into 1 or 2 pages is kind of a remarkable feat. Here's part of the table contents page, which shows you some of the representation of the food in the book. Some of a sense of, we tried to categorize the dishes, which was a pretty tough task considering some of the, they don't fit neatly into categories, but we tried our best here in this page. This is Storm in Brooklyn Media Studio, I think it's called, something like that. Hopefully they'll forgive me. Interviewing a member of the Malaysian project team. She took videos of all of them and all this, schlepped around all this video, audio equipment all over New York City. So, it's too bad she wasn't here to share on behalf of the project she's running. This is an example of the biographical. This is one of the longer pieces, and a lot of it you'll see is in first person that she sort of took directly from the oral history interview and presented it to you, as their narrative, which is fantastic. In other cases, it's mostly third person with a few pull quotes. But if you can imagine picking this excerpt from 4 hours of interview is pretty challenging. This is an example of one of the recipes you'll find in the book. It's a Burmese or tea leaf salad from Myanmar. One of the interesting stories about this, which I'm sure we'll sort of touch on the theme a little bit, was that apparently, I've not been to Myanmar, but apparently you go there and tea leaf salad, fermented tea leaves you can buy like they were Cheetos or Doritos off the shelves. That's not the case here in the U.S. And so the chef behind the Rangoon had to improvise and figure out how to ferment her own tea leaves at home. So this actually includes that step, and it's turns out to be one of the most popular salads at the Queen's Night Market. And I will impose a favorite on Storm. She loves eating this specific salad. And here's sort of partly in tribute to Tim, who I believe is from Hong Kong. Here's a profile and a recipe from our Hong Kong vendor who's been with us since day one. She has an amazing story. She's also the sample chapter we submitted for our book proposal. She's always smiling, and she's an example of, under her tent, you'll see, I think, something like 4 generations of family laughing it up and barely fitting under the 10 by 10, and super excited. And one of the folks that may not have any commercial ambition with their food and just really does it to share their culture and their memories and their stories with New York City. So if you can't tell, she's glowing and polite and, a lot of people's favorite. So there we go. That's a bit about the Queen's Night Market. I'm, sorry again, Storm's not here to tell you a bit more about her oral history project, but I think you can go to vendorstories.com. I think there's a nascent website that sort of covers her various projects, and I think we'll come back to it a little bit as we get further along in the program.
Yeah, thank you for telling us a little bit more about the Queen's Night Market and also what the book is about. And so Tim, I would like to have you talk a little bit about Mandarins Tea Room and Chinatown Soup.
Well, first, thank you, Kelly. And it's so great to be on the panel with John. And thank you, Asian Society, to make this possible. I think it's important that we all get together and talk about how we all could be united as one. So the Mandarins Tea Room is formed as that idea. I started a private tea room in 2004. And then I make it into more of a tea house in 2006. So within all these years, I've been traveling to China, to tea plantation in Taiwan, to Korea, to Nepal, to understand what tea means and bring in that culture, that art forms back to the States and share that. Is a very humbling experience because it's a very old tradition, and a lot of times that we've forgotten how deep this roots is. So I'm from Hong Kong myself, so grew up in a colonial British Chinese territory. It's always a mixed feeling that, oh, this is Chinese, this is not Chinese, this is Hong Kongese, or when I'm looking at John's presentation of Hong Kong food, this bring back a lot of memories, and it's great to share that. So we've been a tea educator mainly because we do direct to farm. We establish a lot of relationship with the farmers itself. First, to learn their culture, even though we're all Chinese, but some are from Yunnan in minority, some are in Taiwan, different country in a way. But all that is the same kind of mentality, is to respect what nature gave us. And through that respect, human culture create arts to that respect, no matter is through poetries, paintings, ceramics, tea ceremony, and it's all linked together as one. So the Mandarins Tea Room was a place that I created for small groups to actually kind of educate people with that, and in returns, being educated by our audience coming in, because they all bring in different history of their background. So the name, the Mandarins Tea Room, is back in many cultures, ancient cultures, they always have kind of mansions or estates that they invite artists, they invite poets, they invite politicians to stay with the estates, and they create different arts and they create different ideas, almost like brainstorming. That doesn't just exist in China as Mandarins, that's what Mandarins means, but also in Europe, in Italy, Catella is another idea of courtyards. So this idea is what we're trying to do in Mandarins Tea Room, is bring different aspects of passions together. And 3 years ago, I'm so lucky to met with the founder of Chinatown Soup, Michelle. She's right here with me. I'm so happy that she's right here with me. And she founded Chinatown Soup in 2014. And that idea is, as a community art space, she created something that bring in the neighborhoods, bring in artists that is too young or too minority in a way, to have a space so that they can showcase themselves. And it's all based on this 1960s Chinatown basements movement, when the civil rights, all that things going on, the Black Panther. The Chinese have a big part of that, in that culture, in that civil rights movements in New York and in LA. And there's a lot of people join together and do communities called Chinatown Basement. So Chinatown Soup actually borrows that ideas into, to make it current. And also this food is shops in Soho. I think it's only exists for 4 years, since 1971. It started by 3 artists, and unfortunately, the model didn't work because they want to feed everyone, especially artists. And you can imagine back in 1970s, everything is kind of in a very bad situations, real estates, homelessness, all this kind of thing is going on. So they create food to feed the neighbor. You can actually get a dinner for $1. So, and that's scale doesn't really work, because at the end of the day, you run out of money. So we try to revive that idea, to bring in the community and bring in other donors for us to create an environment in Chinatown Soup. So I partnered with Michelle 3 years ago and create Soup Cafe. And from there on, we create different kind of venues in art, in exhibition performance. We have music, we have poetry reading, we have a residence program. We have usually 5 different artists working with us in the basement here, and also a garden that we just newly created just to support ourselves and learn about how nature can join. How can we learn about nature in a city like New York City? So all this programming tends to gear towards the more understanding of what we have, not to be getting more greedy. I don't think the world needs more greediness and selfishness at this point. I think it's more important that we learn about how to share each person's knowledge. So the joint force of this give the public a taste of what I learned from tea. So you can come into the cafe and you can taste the tea that we harvest, and also the coffee they also harvest in Colombia. And in returns, people will come in and give us different advice, and people come in, and because it's a nonprofit, people come in and actually start helping us or volunteering. And you can see that I think it's extremely necessary at this point because everyone is trying to give. And I think to give in the right channel, to give within the community is our goal. And we learn from it, and it's one of the really important lessons that I learned from my teachers is if you cannot learn, you teach, and if you cannot teach, you learn again. So, and this is ongoing, and we are very, very happy that we can have a space that we can provide a sanctuary for people. I think food is always important in history, especially war-torn time, or depression, if there's a depression, and it's important because we need to eat 3 times a day. And especially for Chinese, you always just think about next meal. So to create a place that can feed people, you can actually give them a hope to think about something better, to give them ideas what they can do. And that's what Chinatown Soup is about, is to give them physically feeding and mentally also providing that soul food that we're trying to provide. That's what we're trying to do now here. We're closed at the moment, but we're also trying to prepare. We just came back from a farm. We've been working with a lot of organic farmers around New York City and also upstate, just to get in touch. Go little circle first. Go from Brooklyn, then you go bigger and go to Catskills, and then go to Vermont. We're trying to bring in knowledge that is lost or being overseen, that is important, especially in the medicine way of plant medicine. So that's what we're trying to do.
Great, thank you, Tim. So I'd like to share from my perspective as an art museum professional regarding today's topic. The intersection of art and food has enjoyed unprecedented popularity in recent years, especially aided by the rise of social media. Chefs and artists have become cultural icons of our time, and not just within their respective industries. Food as a vehicle for artistic expression, one that connects the human body with nature and with one another, is not a new phenomenon. So let me share my screen. The Japanese tea ceremony has long been an occasion where the appreciation for architecture, painting, calligraphy, poetry, floral arrangement, and teaware is part of tea drinking and seasonal confectionery sampling. Here is a work by the contemporary artist, ceramicist, and tea ceremony practitioner Hanako Miwa, titled Hanakos Tea House, when it was presented at Japan Society in New York in 2014 as part of the exhibition Garden of Unearthly Delight. And I was honored to be invited to participate as a guest. So you can see that's Hanako in her tea house. And you can see the outside from another view and how she's preparing the tea. In the late 1990s, the French curator Nicolas Bouhilde coined the term relational aesthetics to categorize contemporary art practices that focus on the social, participatory, and experiential aspects of artworks. One of the most iconic would be Thai artist Virkret Thirabanit's body of work, where he cooked and served food to exhibition visitors, such as in his work Untitled Free from 1992 at the 303 Gallery in New York, and Untitled Free Still in 2012 when it was recreated at MoMA. His artwork becomes a gathering place for friends and strangers alike over a simple home-cooked meal. It makes encounter with art a literal consumption, but it also democratizes art into something that anyone can understand, just that it's in a gallery or museum setting, and also it's free. Here in this photo, Virkret led a special workshop at Taekwon Contemporary in Hong Kong, where local curators of learning and education gathered. And you can really see how people bond over this experience. Some artists don't necessarily have an official practice that includes food, but are known gourmands. The Chinese painting master Zhang Daqian was known to host dinner parties when he resided in Taipei, and sometimes gifted his handwritten dinner menus to friends as souvenirs. He didn't always wine and dine his guests with extravagance. Many of the menu items are rather humble, such as bean curds, cabbage stewed with pieces of ham, lion's head meatballs, and buns and dumplings, all of which come from different regions of China that chronicle the artist's nomadic life. So what's so special with some menu written on scraps of paper? Many masterpieces of calligraphy that are in state collections today were once just memos written by famed calligraphers, where the content could be as mundane and as short as 12 characters. I hereby present you 300 oranges. It hasn't frosted, and I couldn't get more. These menus are seen as artworks in addition to being a token of friendship and a record of good times had. In 2018, Christie's auctioned off some of Zhang's menus from his personal chef's collection. Here are a few screenshots from Christie's website that show some of these menus that were offered in that sale. So you can see there are a lot of different dishes written on these paper. Some of them have scribbles or paintings on the other side. So this is where the bean curds come from, and also lion's head meatballs. And then here's the cabbage stewed with ham. So very quickly, Jackson Pollock and Lee Krasner, aside from being champions of abstract paintings, also shared a love for cooking and hosting, and have a copy of their cookbook here that was published a few years ago. Many of these dishes they made were shared with their friends. Imagine Jackson Pollock making his favorite pancakes for you if you stayed with him. In the 1970s, in New York Soho, which Tim just talked about a little bit, there was the artist-run restaurant Food, and that really became an important neighborhood gathering place for artists. And then these days, there are also chefs whose culinary prowess and artistry have influenced the way we look at food today. In 2007, the Documenta 12 curatorial team included Spanish chef Ferran Adria's legendary restaurant El Bulli as one of the venues of the international exhibition. And in 2014, the Drawing Center in New York did an exhibition that showed the chef's notes and drawings and models that he used for research with his kitchen staff. and the New York Times art critic Roberta Smith crowned him a culinary Dali in her review. And last but not least, the dialogue between art and food can be fun. The pastry chef, Caitlin Freeman, initially left her art training because she loved Wayne Thiebaud's cake paintings in the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art and wanted to make those cakes. When she was in charge of pastries served at one of the cafes at SF MoMA, she took visual and conceptual cues from the collection and created the iconic Mandarin cake, which is this one, among other artwork look-alike mouth-watering desserts. Now you too can make these modern art desserts at home. So going back to our conversation, the French author Marcel Proust famously wrote about experiencing a flood of memories after biting into a madeleine in his book, In Search of Lost Time, or sometimes also translated as Remembrance of Things Past. I'd like to hear from John and Tim about how familiar foods evoke our collective memories. John, your idea of the Queen's Night Market rooted from your fondness of night markets that you experienced as a child when you traveled with your family back to Taiwan. Can you share how that translates to what Queen's Night Market does?
Sure. Yeah, when I used to spend 6 weeks every summer with my family, my extended family in Taiwan, I was the little kid who bothered every family member to take me to the night market because that was all I ever wanted to do in Taiwan. Well, video games during the day and night markets at night. And there was something about it as a kid, it was great because there's all these great games and, cheap food and sort of everything skewered under the sun, food-wise skewered. But there was something about, there's an electricity and magic in there. And to me, it felt like, I'm not a sociologist, but it felt like the entire city, sort of a cross-section, a representative sample of the entire city was in these night markets without regard to cultural barriers or socioeconomic barriers. And to me, that's, I know people come to the Queen's Night Market for food, and that's sort of a focus of our sort of curation, but, a major element of the event. But I still envision the Queen's Night Market as a community space and a cultural space more than just a food festival, right? And so it was really all the decisions that we made along the way in terms of the price point, in terms of the curation of vendors was meant to, can we create a community space in New York City that hopefully transcends cultural barriers and socioeconomic barriers and any sort of barrier you can hopefully think of. So there's that aspect, and I think you were gonna ask Storm something about some of this stuff, and connecting food and stories. So to backtrack a little bit, the most important element about the Queen's Night Market in terms of food vendor, you'd asked about what does a vendor application look like for food vendors, and all this name, address, phone number, that kind of standard stuff. But the most important part of the application is asking people to relate what they want to sell at the Queen's Night Market to their cultural and personal heritage, and that has the effect of eliminating a lot of people who just want to sell something just because it's the hottest trend or something they dreamt up and sort of a food novelty. Those are the things we veer away from because we want to tell these sort of personal stories through their food. And a lot of times what happens in these in the application process is, I think you had mentioned, or we had talked about a Persian vendor who had a career in baking and wanted to sell, her initial application wanted to sell cookies and cupcakes, and we have hundreds and hundreds of those applications, and it doesn't always fit our theme and our curational theme. So I told her, I explained to her, hopefully politely, what we were looking for, and then she went back and rediscovered her Persian roots and forged these new relationships with her extended family, talking about these food elements. And so that was a great story, and she's actually in the book under Sweet Zara. Her recipe in the book is halva, and Storm has definitely explored. There's a whole lot more with her oral history interviews. She she told me the story of one of our vendors, and the cookbook, most of the recipes are the first time they've ever been written down, and so passing down these, you're forcing these vendors to standardize and use measurements that maybe they haven't ever before. And so one of the stories Storm shared with me was a Latin vendor who was making Salvadoran pupusas, and she would we were trying to get her to give us the recipe and the measurements, and as she was explaining it to her daughter as a translator, her measurements were in Chinese takeout containers. So one Chinese takeout container of cornmeal and one Chinese container of chicken stock, and it took us a lot of work to sort of translate that into a standardized cookbook format. So Storm will have, too bad she's not here to tell you some of these stories that really relate food and as a vehicle and a transition point and a bridge to people's stories and cultures.
Great. So I'd like to turn to Tim and to address how Mandarins Tea Room and Chinatown Soup, so through both of these initiatives, you're creating conversations and understanding of heritage through the sharing of knowledge around food and plant medicine. I think you talked a little bit about that earlier, but maybe you can expand and then give us some more examples, maybe some concoctions that you're working on.
All these food talks making me hungry also. I'm kind of surrounded by mosquito now because we have a new garden, and it's like dinner time for them. For me, I'm the dinner. But as I can speak on the term on tea. Tea is also food. As John mentioned, there in Myanmar, they make it into a fermented tea salad, which is very yummy. I think there's a lot of experience that I have. People ask, what is tea? And how can you relate that? There's a very moving moment one time when Splendid Tables host Francis Lam came by and did a podcast with me, and he brought over an old tea cake from his past father. And he told me that after his father passed, he never opened up that can for like over 10 years. And he brought that cake over and tried to understand it. And so we make the tea. I make it as touching as possible, or not touching, but more in tune as possible. And then at the end of the session, we all cry. I think food can evoke a lot of memories, and especially old tea can involve a lot of memories. And that memories could be shared with someone that's drinking the same tea. And sometimes we not necessarily know how to express that, but you can feel it. And from there on, I think there's a great humanity in there that we all share, in a way, love. Food is love for me. I think it's for our community too, because it nurtures you, it nourishes you, and it makes people come together. As Chinese tea is more, now it's getting more popular for the Western culture, people are getting understanding of all this nuance for it. But also another occasion that I make a very strong espresso style tea for my Italian chef friends, Rocco Dispirito. He's a very well-known chef. And I make the tea for him in an espresso style way, and it reminds him of Rome. And that is something interesting because there's no boundaries, there's no country. If I make a tea in a way that I understand Italian espresso, I mean, they already immediately relate to it and be curious about it. And that's where conversations start. It's like, this is tea, this tastes like espresso. So I think a lot of these happy accidents, I would say, is something that we try to really want to create. And it starts with the conversation. It starts with me doing something, or my volunteers here doing something from their heart, and somebody took it in and they give more into it, and we will form a new ideas to share. And from there, I think it would make that moment better. and hopefully we can do that more often to showcase in that sense. So I think that's what Food Break brought to what my understanding is.
Great, thank you. So during this COVID-19 pandemic, our relationship with food has changed drastically. Grocery stores are now the one place that we can still freely shop, and also still observing physical distancing. Restaurants are closed or they're operating on skeletal staff and offering takeout and delivery service only. Early on, there was a global flour shortage when everyone decided that, if I'm gonna be stuck at home, I better be baking. So then very soon there was also a shortage of commercial yeast, and because of that, then everybody started making sourdough starters, and also in an attempt to limit outings in general, people started windowsill scallion farms. Can we talk a little bit about how COVID-19 has affected your work for these community-based projects? So, John, can you maybe you can start with Queen's Night Market?
Sure. It's from an event that brings up to 20,000 people on good weather nights. We were obviously one of the first types of events that it was clear that were not going to be permitted during the pandemic. And so I think in mid-March, we made the decision to indefinitely postpone the season, and we'll see if it comes back on. But since that's the bulk of our operations, that part has just been shuttered completely. So we've taken on several other projects. Up until fairly recently, we've been working for 3 months or so on the Fuel the Front Lines, which we fundraise to hire Queen's Night Market vendors and local businesses to feed healthcare workers on the front lines. The situation in the hospitals in New York City seem to be improving, thankfully. So I think that is winding down a little bit. But now I've joined several coalitions, from a tourism recovery coalition to Food and Economic Security Council or Recovery Council, focused specifically on Queens, and even more specifically on Elmhurst and Corona being two of the hardest hit neighborhoods in New York City. So we've sort of tried to leverage our assets and pivot our assets and help out where we can in New York City. I think in our notes here, I have something about Storm and she has the Queen's Night Market Vendor Stories Oral History Project, which is a big ongoing project, which, hopefully will last years in the future. And those long oral histories are being archived at the Nunn Center for Oral History, which is, I believe, the University of Kentucky. They'll be archived and forever and ever. And but she's also working on a different project this year called the Queen's Memory Project, which is interviewing people with connections to Queens, if I'm not paraphrasing incorrectly, basically relaying their accounts and their stories from the coronavirus or the COVID pandemic. So I know that she's shifted from interviewing vendors about sort of, why are you at the night market and how is it impacting and how does it reflect all sorts of things, and sort of transition that specifically to, how has the pandemic affected your business and your life, and, what do you see going forward? I'm not doing the interview, so I can't say exactly that's what it sounds like, but, so that's the Queen's Memory Project. And I think they are encouraging anyone with a connection to Queens to submit their stories or even take the stories from other folks that they know. So that's kind of how the pandemic has affected us, or at least me and a bit Storm, in terms of, I don't want to speak on her behalf, but.
Great, thanks. I think it's always nice to hear that, I think, I can probably speak for all of us that we're definitely at a more privileged side of things, that, we're healthy and we're still really, we still have a lot of resources that's available to us. It's always great to hear that people are paying back to the community that they come from. And I think that's one of the things that I found really important, especially during the pandemic, is that we support local businesses, we support a neighborhood, we support our people. So, Tim, do you want to add?
Yes, this is a very good story to tell. We because of everything shut down, we have a backyard. It was actually basically a dump yard for over 3 years. We decided to clean it up because it's a privilege to have a space in New York City, and not to use it is quite a shame. So we decided to build our own herbal garden in the back. And as what Kelly said, that everybody is doing the scallion little plant. We started that a little bit on that, and I have a little bit of a background of how tea was grown in the plantations and also in the wild. So, usually it takes at least 16 years before you can actually have something. But when we are starting to grow our herb from seeds, it takes almost 2 months before we see a little sprout out. And the next day, that, the rats came in because everything shut down in the city, and they became so hungry. They will eat whatever. So they just come in and just have a buffet. And then we do it again. And it really teaches us, how important what farmer does, and how farmer actually put in this sweat into creating food for us. That understanding is important because most of the time we go to a grocery store, we pick whatever, and then we just because we pay for it, we don't care, we just eat it. There's no narrative, there's no background behind it, where the source came from. As John mentioned, food security is a big thing. So because of that kind of experience, and we start to connect with different farms around in New York State, and to start to learn from what they know. We're doing a program with a full organic farm up in Catskill, and he has a 30 acres land. We're doing a lot of understanding of how even to sprout. I think that's a good thing because everybody is trying to grow something now. They have times in their hands. And a lot of times that when you have habit of coffee and tea, especially in this pandemic, you are not in a very good position because then you stay up till 4 o'clock in the morning. And then you kind of hate yourself doing that of your habits, and then you do it again the next day, and the next day, and then the weeks after. So a lot of people are looking into alternative, which can also help you, meaning herbal, that is non-caffeinated. So one thing came over, we have a program, we work with this woman, Liz, that she does, is called Gathering Ground, which is a local foragings, herbals medicine tour. So she told me about mugwort. I mean, it's something that you will pass by and you thought there's a weed product, so you just want to kill it. But turned out that mugwort is one of the most potent local medicine that you can get, especially for female. You have your menstrual cycles, and also for your lung respiratory. There's a reason why there's herbs around us that they are so resistant, because they're trying to help us. And a lot of times we just, disregard them. So I'm not telling you to go to West Side Highway to one of those things and start picking weed, and you need to understand, you need to respect them. And what is better respect is to grow it from yourself. So if you have a little windowsill, or you don't have any window, you can get a grow light, as we tried before. Get the seeds that is local, grow it, let it grow up. You might have a harvest in late summer, but within this 3 months, you're going to learn a lot from it. And I think that this pandemic's been helping us a lot to understand that where is our food coming from. People are buying snake plants to grow at home. All this, people are trying to be more responsible and trying to own something that they can nurture and they can understand. Oh, I don't have a green thumb. I killed everything, even my cactus. But now is the time to learn. So that's what we can learn from it.
Great, thank you, Tim. I definitely do not have a green thumb, and I definitely tried to grow scallion. It did sprout pretty fast, but and then it went downhill from there.
Keep trying.
I will. So since both of you spoke a little bit about how you're connecting with your communities and learning from your communities and giving back to your communities, I think it's really important that social agendas are being addressed through all of our work. And I'd like to highlight the work of Korean American artist Mina Chung. Her performative installation Eat Choco Pie Together will be part of our triennial. Let me just show you. So 10,000 choco pies donated by the South Korean Orion Co. will be installed for visitors to take and eat as nourishment and as a gift for art and healing, for everyone to take a bite for peace. Chung uses this common snack in Korea as a means to advocate for peace and love around the world, initially shared between the joint North and South Korean labor force in the 1950s. Choco pie is known to be worth 3 bowls of rice in North Korea and remains one of the most smuggled goods there. To date, thousands of choco pies were sent over the DMZ by balloons from the South, with messages of love and care as well as foreign media. And the artist dedicates this installation to all the courageous North Korean defectors around the world. An Indian artist, Viba Galhotra, whose work Who Owns the Water is part of the upcoming triennial as well, and her work addresses the state of water in our planet. She conceptually and artistically curated a dinner to revive the idea of food ceremonies as social and political gatherings, focusing on the impact of human action on water bodies and its circulatory effect on human health and mortality. Yes, probably also on morality too. Dinner participants are expected to engage in conversations around water and climate change issues in our time. Here are some photos from when this dinner was hosted at Asia Society last November. You can see it's very performative and very participatory.
And they also have visors as if it's the pandemic.
I know. When I saw, because I didn't work on the program that evening, but it was by invitation only. But it was when I saw the photos, I was like, and for this talk, especially, it just fit in so well.
Life imitating it.
So yeah, I know it's just kind of the world going in circles. So I wonder if we want to talk a little bit about, since because of Vipa's project is talking about water and how it affects us and how everything is in a circle. Do you want to address a little bit about sustainability and environmental aspects before we go to our Q&A? John, do you want to talk a little bit about that aspect with Queens Night Market?
Sure. To be honest and frank, it's, a lot of times comes down to, we strive to be as sustainable as we can and survive both sort of economically or sort of environmentally sustainable, but also we have to balance that sometimes with, unfortunately, business sustainability. And so, constantly it's a calculation. We have a biodiesel generator, which I'm been convinced is the way to go. And in terms of bringing, 75,000 watts to the event to sort of power these vendors is one of the most economic ways to do it, most environmentally sustainable ways to do it. But every year we try to grapple with composting. At one point for a few years, one of our volunteers, Rena, had a bokashi compost stations scattered throughout, and that was such a sort of intensive, human resource intensive project. So, you talk about large commercial commercial scale, industrial scale composting, it costs, it would blow our budget completely out of the water just to do it for one night. So, we also explore, as we talked about, eco-friendly utensils and encouraging visitors to bring their own, sort of hopefully one day changing the, supply and demand structure of it, and sort of, but that, it's an uphill battle too there. And then vendors themselves, they in some ways operate independently, are allowed to make their own business decisions. And so some of them do compostable, eco-friendly plating, and others do what's, the cheapest and most economical. So it's something that we grapple with basically every day and every year. And, it's something we're working on, but it's always omnipresent and at the forefront of our thoughts. It's a tricky thing and very complicated, to say the least.
Yeah, well, I mean, even during this current pandemic, New York City has suspended the compost program.
Right, I know.
I'm very sad about.
There's a lot of, I've been reading a lot of angry backlash about that.
Yeah. Tim, what about in Chinatown?
Yeah, I mean, you just mentioned that they suspended the compost system. Is really, I mean, is devastating, especially to a nonprofit community like us. We were fortunate enough before they shut them down. They were donating a lot of compost soil for us for the backyard, for our gardens, and they will even hand deliver them, even 20 pounds through a bicycle over. I mean, the community of that is so strong, and hopefully we're doing a little bit of online sign-on to support reviving that program. It's important, I think, to learn where the source came from. To be sustainable is important. We, in the very beginning, we just have no money, so we get donations, mostly donated by friends that have shops. For example, Canal Street Market donated us a lot of paper cups that they're not using anymore. Even though that they are recyclable, they're not they're not those like really fancy one. Just use them because they're already made. As long as they're not plastic, I think we should use up what people don't use rather than throw it away. At least there's a usage to it. And to that note, we also have a program that we do mason jars that we can recycle mason jars. People put their names on it, and we put a little stickers on it. They come back, and you get a 10% off on whatever you want to fill up. Those are the things that's important. I think it's not just a community actions on sustainability, but it's more educational. It's someone learn about mass farming. I think that's one of the things that is not sustainable. You cannot raise cattle like that. We're going to a little bit more further on that, but there's always ways. There's always farm that our moms and pops, shops that are been doing things the old way, which sustain everything. And just because bigger company come in and just shadow them over doesn't mean that the value is still valid. So we need to learn about that kind of things and educations. I mean, knowledge is the empowering part of what sustainability is. So learning from John also, a market like that, part of it, some people really do have really good recyclable one-use package. But other people don't have so. New York State passed a law to have those foam takeout boxes. They banned it, I think 6 months ago. And now even regular shops will have a recyclable lunchbox. I think those are because people want them, and we have to voice it out, and we have to band together and vote. I mean, it's a political movement, but also is an individual movement. If we ask for it, I think people will listen. If we don't buy we don't buy in the old way, then people have to change. So.
Yeah, and I mean, I really like the idea of being try, like, everybody can do their bit to make everything a little bit last longer and more sustainable. And like Tim said, it's not necessarily about getting rid of, you know, all the bad things you currently own, but also about how to create less waste in general. And I like that, you know, a lot of the restaurants and a lot of people in general are rethinking how to live a zero waste life. And John also talked a little bit about this too, like, you know, people starting bringing their own containers, you know, to when they dine out. And I think that's also reminiscent of when I was growing up in Taiwan. You know, if, say, we were going to go buy takeout, we would bring our little pot. It's like a steel pot that has a little handle. And every family has one. You just take it to, you know, buy your soy milk from the breakfast stall or whatever, which is also part of Wong Kar-wai's In the Mood for Love. So when they go to buy noodles, that's how neighbors would meet and chat and, you know, find out about dirty secrets. Cool. So so we're at 7:00 in New York, and I'm ready to take some questions from the audience. And let's see, we have a question for John. Has the night market evolved in ways that you didn't anticipate when you started?
Yes and no. You know, the changes in the night market have really been a matter of numbers, right? So what we started with, you know, 20-something food vendors that first night and 20-something merchandise vendors. You know, now we sort of are at capacity when we have 60 food vendors. You know, the first night, well, I can't really talk about how many people came that very first night, but, you know, on average, we sort of have, you know, probably average 2,000 or 3,000 or 4,000 people a night coming as visitors that first year. And now we're averaging over, I think, nearly 14,000 visitors a night. And that sort of includes bad weather nights. You know, we started probably that first night in 2015, we probably at that point had represented, you know, 10 or 15 countries through their cuisines, and now we have, you know, running tally is over 90, and that's just the only way we really can count them feasibly is by country, right? That doesn't even count the number of regions in China we've represented, and just the U.S. we've represented, in sort of all the regional cuisines that we don't count in there. So it's just 90 plus countries, but, you know, how many? Probably double that number in just sort of what you would call regional cuisines, and I think, you know, it's just the event has continued to get more and more diverse as it's gone on over the years, which I think was the entire point. And it's sort of, I don't want to say it was unexpected, but it was definitely something like, you know, I'm not the most optimistic person. So if you asked me in 2014, you know, I probably wouldn't have said the Queens night market would exist past 2015. And so the idea that so many people keep coming and that it continue getting more and more diverse, I think New York Magazine sort of raved about, you know, we were named number one place to eat outdoors in 2019, mostly because of how diverse we were and how fun it was. So, yeah, it mostly matter of quantity and not quality. I think that we've changed.
Great. We also have a comment that's not really a question about, as a comment for Tim, because the viewer thought the sharing tea is the story he shared about the sharing of tea is very beautiful. And then and then another question for John. How many different cuisines are represented? I think you talked a little bit about that. And how did you decide to only have $5 dishes?
Sure. Right. So the quick answer, the first part is just over 90 countries, and that just does represented in their cuisines, but that doesn't include regional cuisines, which would multiply that number. In terms of the $5 price cap that we introduced in 2015, two things. One was I just quit being a corporate lawyer in New York City, and I spent a year, I paid off my student loans and then went traveling for a year. And, you know, it always amazes me visiting developing countries, how privileged in the U.S. many of us are. You know, things that we would anticipate buying for $10 or $15 in the U.S. cost us, you know, in exchange rates, $1 over there. And so, you know, it's sort of a great feeling, but also one with a little bit of guilt. So I was doing that, and I came back to New York after travels. I no longer had a a paycheck. And so in New York City, when you don't have a paycheck, is pretty insanely unaffordable. And so these two things, I think, came together, and I thought, well, why don't I try to push back on both, one, highlight the beauty of affordability, but also push back against New York City's skyrocketing costs. And then, so that boiled down to $5. It was really just how cool would it be if everywhere you went, every stand you went in the night market, you had a $5 bill and that could buy you something there, or, you could afford anything that person's selling. The $6 exceptions have thrown that little into a mix, and now people are getting, 4 ones when they hand over a 10 sometimes, but that's the origin of the $5 price cap.
Great. Yeah, and I really like that when earlier you also talked about how this price point really helps equalizing everybody, and it is very true that, back when I still had cable TV, one of the ads I saw a lot was like all these celebrities who live in New York would take turns, and it's like a public announcement type of infomercial in a way that will ask you, oh, how many people do you think are hungry in New York City? And the number is daunting, and it's also, we all know that very early on, like the mayor of New York just didn't, want to close schools, mostly because then a lot of the students and their families would then have no food because they rely on that school lunch. So, it is, food is definitely, when I was studying, in college, one of my anthropology / art history classes, we talked about, food politics, and it is very true. You are what you eat. What you have access to, and also, and it becomes part of you. So I guess, do we have more questions? Okay. So we have a question for Tim. Do you see the model of Chinatown Soup succeeding in other neighborhoods, and are there similar initiatives elsewhere?
Oh, good questions. Chinatown Soup is based on Detroit Soup. Is an organization started over how long ago? Maybe 10 years ago. It was a soup kitchen before, and Michelle, Steve, my partners, contacted them because the idea is great. So they sent her a handbook of how to create a soup place. So nowadays there's over 160 different soup all around the world, but they don't have a brick and mortar, so we're the only one that actually have a physical space. Most of them are depends on their focus. Most of them are for feeding other people and the people that is in need, to give them a space of security. That's what soup is about, to give people a security space to have and to be safe and talk about their minds freely, and actually have a filled lunch, dinner, or breakfast. So I think it's the model could work anywhere, and it depends on the directions of where do you want to focus on. If you want to focus on art, and that's why we have a lot of people call this an art community. We are very art focused, and we're using art to express the current situation, the past situation, and the future situations, and using art as a vehicle because it's the most direct channels for any different level of societies to relate, and is the most direct recording of the current moment as art. To have a physical space for art as Chinatown Soup like this is it depends on if you have a physical space. If not, you can always, go to your church. Sunday church might have a good room for you to start some movement like this. Go to your community, demand a smaller room. Have a group of friends that have a little space. I mean, it can start anywhere. The idea that we always believe is if you build it, it will come. And I think it's important to have that mentality of don't be afraid. So if your scallion doesn't grow first time, do it twice. It will come to you as long as you have a dedication to it. So, but don't expect, wild success. I mean, it's not about the success. It's about the process.
Great. That's a really great note to end our conversation. It's been a pleasure for me to share this conversation with everybody, and I'd like to thank John and Tim for being here today to introduce to us their projects. This is a great conversation, I feel like. So usually for our book programs, we would have book signing to follow the conversation, but obviously this is not possible at the moment. If you'd like to learn more about the stories from the vendors who come from 40 plus countries to Queen's Night Market and expand your culinary repertoire, which I think everybody needs right now, don't forget that The World Eats Here is available to purchase through Asia Store. We have a link on the website. And if you enjoyed our talk about how art and food bring people together, please also stay tuned for our third museum salon in July, where we will be talking to artists and museum colleagues around the world to see what we've all been up to in the last several months during the shutdown. And thank you very much again for joining us this evening. We can't wait to see all of you when we reopen the museum. In the interim, please stay healthy and stay safe. Have a wonderful week. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kelly.
Thank you.